Two British scientists are finally revealing the DNA evidence they say helps solve one of history's biggest crime mysteries, the identity of Jack the Ripper.
For more than a century, one mystery has refused to fade into history. A case surrounded by shadows, rumors, and unanswered questions. Now, an artifact long hidden in private collections may finally reopen the investigation. Preserved fibers, microscopic traces, and modern forensic science could reveal clues that Victorian investigators never had the tools to uncover. Could this forgotten piece of evidence become the silent witness that changes everything? Stay with us as we explore the discovery that might bring us closer than ever to identifying history's most elusive killer. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to uncover more hidden historical mysteries. For decades, the fabric had been tucked away in storage, forgotten and untouched. Yet, woven into its fibers was a hidden biological record, silently waiting for science to catch up. When modern forensic technology finally examined it, the discovery pointed to a name that would stun the world. Every legendary mystery has a turning point, a moment when everything begins to change. For the Jack the Ripper case, that moment didn't occur in a police archive or a high-tech laboratory. It happened in a crowded auction hall in 2007, when author Russell Edwards, who had spent years investigating the Whitechapel murders, decided to purchase an item many historians had already dismissed as worthless. The object was a silk shawl more than 7 feet long, marked by dark, aged stains. According to auction records, it had supposedly been collected from the crime scene of Catherine Eddowes, the Ripper's 4th victim. The story claimed that a police officer present that night, Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson, had taken the shawl home, intending it as a gift for his wife. Shocked by its origin, she refused to use it, storing it away instead. Over the next century, the fabric passed quietly through generations, never washed and rarely handled. Most experts doubted the tale. The market had long been filled with questionable Ripper artifacts, and an unwashed shawl surviving intact for more than 100 years sounded almost impossible. But Edwards trusted his instincts. Where others saw an old relic, he saw the possibility of preserved biological evidence. The odds were incredibly slim. The cloth had been exposed to light, dust, and countless hands over the years. Expecting any usable trace evidence seemed unrealistic. Yet Edwards wasn't searching for fingerprints. He was searching for something investigators in the Victorian era had never even imagined: DNA. He brought the shawl to Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a leading specialist in genetic analysis known for extracting usable data from extremely degraded samples. Inside a carefully controlled laboratory environment, the team began examining the fabric with extraordinary precision, focusing on mitochondrial DNA, a form of genetic material passed down through the maternal line and capable of remaining stable for thousands of years. If they could locate a living maternal relative of the victim and find a match, they could confirm whether the shawl had truly been present at the crime scene. After extensive research, they identified a descendant from Catherine Eddowes' family and obtained a comparison sample. The moment of testing carried enormous tension. A mismatch would likely prove the artifact meaningless. When the results arrived, the match was exact. The DNA confirmed that the shawl had indeed been at the 1888 crime scene and had absorbed the victim's blood. But the scientists uncovered something else as well: additional biological traces embedded in the fabric, evidence that could only have come from the killer himself. For the first time in more than a century, the investigation had a tangible lead. The hunt for the identity behind the legend was no longer chasing shadows. It finally had a real target. The investigators were no longer chasing a legend. For the first time, they possessed a genetic profile. a biological signature that could belong to the man responsible for the killings. Edwards and the research team already had a suspect in mind, and this wasn't speculation. The name had appeared quietly in original police records, mentioned by senior investigators who suspected him but never had the proof to confirm it. To test their theory, the team needed a living maternal relative of the suspect, so they could compare mitochondrial DNA with the biological traces discovered on the shawl. After an extensive search, they located a woman descended from the suspect's sister. She agreed to provide a DNA sample. When the comparison was run, the results aligned. The genetic markers matched. After 137 years of speculation, countless books, and endless theories, science pointed toward a single individual, Aaron Kosminski. This is where the popular cinematic version of the story begins to fade. Many people prefer the idea of Jack the Ripper as a mysterious aristocrat, a brilliant surgeon, or even a royal conspirator. Over the decades, suspects have ranged from Prince Albert Victor to the painter Walter Sickert. The public imagination often turns the killer into an almost theatrical villain, but the evidence suggests something far less dramatic and far more disturbing. Aaron Kosminski was not a powerful mastermind. He was an obscure young immigrant, a Polish barber living in the poverty-stricken neighborhoods of Whitechapel. Arriving in London in the early 1880s to escape violence in Eastern Europe, he hoped to find a safer life with his family. Instead, he found himself surrounded by the crushing hardship of the East End. Historical records describe him as deeply troubled. Modern specialists reviewing those documents believe he likely suffered from severe mental illness, marked by paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and intense fear of others. Reports also describe severe neglect of personal hygiene and a strong hostility toward women, details that troubled investigators even at the time. Importantly, this suspicion was not invented decades later. Police officials during the investigation were already watching Kosminski. In 1894, Chief Constable Melville MacNagton listed him in a confidential report as one of the leading suspects, describing him as unstable and potentially dangerous. Additional insight came years later when the family of Chief Inspector Donald Swanson discovered handwritten notes in the margins of one of his personal books about the case. In those notes, Swanson indicated that a suspect, identified as Kosminski, had once been recognized by a witness but was never formally charged. Privately, Swanson appeared convinced that the barber was responsible, though the case was never legally solved. Understanding why no arrest followed requires looking beyond the suspect and examining the environment in which the crimes occurred. The Whitechapel district of 1888 was dramatically different from the elegant Victorian London often portrayed in films. The East End was overcrowded, impoverished, and plagued by disease. Tens of thousands of people were packed into crumbling buildings and narrow alleyways, with entire families often sharing a single room. The famous London fog frequently turned into thick, polluted smog, reducing visibility to almost nothing and creating ideal conditions for someone wishing to disappear into the darkness. Street lighting was weak, the streets were crowded, and daily survival was uncertain for many residents. Cheap lodging houses, often filthy and overcrowded, offered a bed for only a few pennies, and those who could not afford even that were left to sleep outside. The women now remembered as the primary victims were not glamorous figures, but individuals struggling to survive in an unforgiving environment. Many were middle-aged, facing poverty, instability, and limited opportunities. Their nightly search for food, shelter, or a few coins often forced them into dangerous situations, making them easy targets for someone familiar with the neighborhood's maze of alleys and side streets. In a place where hardship was everywhere and thousands of people lived in similar conditions, a troubled local man could move through the streets without drawing much attention. Even as fear spread across the city, crucial evidence was mishandled, and early investigative limitations prevented authorities from building a definitive case, mistakes that would allow the mystery to endure for more than a century. And in the midst of that chaos, one critical clue would soon be lost, setting the investigation back in ways no one at the time could fully understand. Police forces poured into the area. More than 2,000 individuals were interviewed, around 80 suspects were temporarily detained, and the investigation became one of the largest manhunts Britain had ever seen. Yet despite the massive effort, the killer was never arrested. So how did Aaron Kosminski remain free? The reason is surprisingly straightforward. Investigators were working with extremely limited tools. Modern forensic science didn't exist in 1888. There were no secured crime scenes, no protective suits, and no standardized evidence procedures. Whenever a body was discovered, crowds quickly gathered, reporters stepped in, and any physical traces were often disturbed within minutes. Fingerprint identification wouldn't become standard practice for years, and blood analysis techniques had not yet been developed. Detectives had little more than eyewitness testimony, and in the heavy London smog, those accounts rarely agreed. Some witnesses described a tall attacker, others a short one. Some thought he appeared respectable, others claimed he looked like a laborer. The descriptions created confusion rather than clarity. Even more frustrating is the fact that investigators did uncover potential clues, but some were lost. Near the location where Catherine Eddowes was found, officers discovered a torn piece of her apron, apparently dropped by the fleeing attacker. Above it, written in chalk on a nearby wall, was a strange message. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The meaning was unclear, and authorities feared it might spark violence against the already vulnerable Jewish community living in the East End. Concerned about possible unrest, Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the writing removed before it could even be photographed or analyzed. In an effort to prevent riots, the only message the killer may have left behind disappeared forever. Then there were the letters. The infamous name Jack the Ripper actually originated from a message sent to a news agency, written in red ink and mocking the police. The letter ignited intense media attention, but many historians now believe it was likely a hoax, possibly created by journalists seeking sensational headlines. While investigators spent time dealing with these questionable communications, another package arrived that seemed far more disturbing. Sent to community leader George Lusk, it contained half of a preserved human kidney, along with a chilling note claiming the organ had been taken from one of the victims. Medical examination at the time suggested the kidney was genuine and consistent with a condition known to have affected Catherine Eddowes. Even so, without modern forensic methods such as DNA testing, the evidence could not be definitively linked to anyone, becoming yet another unresolved lead. More than a century later, scientific advances finally provided new insight. When Dr. Lau Halanen published his findings in 2019, the conclusions were based not on speculation, but on genetic analysis. The mitochondrial DNA recovered from the shawl matched known descendants of the victim, confirming the artifact's authenticity. Additional biological traces found on the same fabric showed genetic markers consistent with the maternal lineage of Aaron Kosminski. Researchers acknowledged the limitations, the age of the material, and the possibility of contamination. But the statistical consistency of the results strongly supported the connection. What makes this discovery especially powerful is not just the possibility of identifying a suspect, but the demonstration of how modern science can reopen cases once thought permanently closed. For more than a century, the Jack the Ripper investigation existed almost entirely in the realm of speculation, built from newspaper reports, incomplete police files, and conflicting witness accounts. Now, technology allows historians and forensic specialists to revisit physical objects connected to the past and extract information that investigators of the time could never have imagined. This shift is changing the way we understand historical crimes. Items once dismissed as curiosities, clothing, letters, personal belongings, may actually function as biological archives, preserving microscopic traces of the people who handled them. Each fiber, stain, or fragment has the potential to contain genetic data that can connect individuals across generations. In the future, as analytical methods become even more precise, evidence once considered unusable may yield entirely new conclusions. Of course, historical forensic work must always be approached carefully. Researchers must account for contamination, environmental damage, and the long chain of people who may have handled an artifact over decades. Yet even with these challenges, the progress already achieved shows how dramatically the investigative landscape has evolved. Cases that once depended solely on human memory and handwritten reports can now be examined using molecular-level analysis. The story also reminds us that many mysteries endure not because clues never existed, but because the tools to interpret them had not yet been invented. What seemed impossible in the 19th century is becoming routine in the 21st. As laboratories continue refining techniques for recovering DNA from degraded materials, historians may find that other unsolved cases, some forgotten entirely, still hold answers quietly preserved in storage rooms, archives, and museum collections, waiting for the moment when science is ready to reveal them. It raises an intriguing question. How many other historical artifacts, stored quietly in archives and museum basements, still contain hidden evidence, waiting for modern science to uncover their secrets? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries.